Well, hello, gentlemen. You just figured out that you have won the 2015 delegate election for the Nationalist Party. How do y'all feel?
Good.
Pretty good. Yeah.
It's fantastic. All right, so viewers at home want to know what you guys are like. So let's start on you, Luke. Yes, let's start on you with the left.
All right. Hi, I'm Luke Lazinski, and I was nominated from MacArthur County, and the position I was Commissioner of Insurance. And basically, that means I handle everything to do with insurance in Kansas. I plan to take a very liberal step forward and make sure that everyone has equal coverage under this, and that companies are not abusing it and taking advantage of the system at the expense of the poor and those who have pre-existing conditions. This is very important, and I just hope to make a difference.
My name is Alex Troball, and I am the Nationalist nominee for governor of 2015. I think it's important to fight for people that don't normally have a voice. I think that's something that I'll be able to do in executive office. I also have a large amount of control of things that come out of the legislative body, and I've already discussed with many of these senators and representatives policies that will hopefully be passed and that I will hopefully be able to sign on to that will, and again, hopefully benefit Boise State.
Hi, my name is Matthew Wagner, and I'm the Nationalist nominee for Secretary of State. And what I want to do, ideally, is help Kansas become what it once was. And Kansas now is in a bad state, and I hope to, or I want to, get its economy back on track, get its education back to being in a good spot.
Hi, my name is Lucas Liu, and I'm the Nationalist Party Attorney General candidate. As the Chief Legal Advisor to the state and as Attorney General, as well as the Chief Law Enforcement Office, I will be in charge of justice, and I'm excited to work with the other judges and attorneys to have the best possible scenario in Kansas.
My name is Yifang Ding. I am the Nationalist nominee for the treasurer position. I come from Pershing County in this simulation, and my plan is to reduce the Kansas deficit and also increase spending on education and other programs by increasing the gas tax and other progressive taxes to provide funding.
Thank you. So let's get to the real stuff, shall we? What do you individuals plan to do about the education that is becoming more and more difficult for everyday Americans? Kansans.
I think we believe that quality education is important, and it's something that's oftentimes not really something schools provide in Kansas. Even if there are schools that are well funded, they don't necessarily have the best teachers. And so we think that to begin, we need to make sure that schools have teachers that are teaching students what they need to know and doing it effectively. We believe there are means through which we can implement better teaching methods, for one, and actually educate teachers that are currently within the system to be better teachers, to be able to better educate students and to be more knowledgeable. And then we also believe that if those teachers can't be helped or if they're simply detrimental to the students, that there should be a system of reviews put in place for administrators, from teachers, and specifically from students as well, that are allowed to evaluate teachers and thus dictate whether or not there are problems with those teachers and whether or not they should continue to be within a school system.
And along with that, currently there's a huge discrepancy between funding for different schools. So, for example, a 6A school that has a decent academic ranking gets a whole bunch more funding than a school in, say, like an urban center population where maybe they don't have the best test scores. You know, what that does really is the schools get more funding just get better, and the schools that don't get funding just get worse. And that's a problem, and that's something that we have the power to fix, because we can normalize funding and have equal funding, or at least more equal funding for all the schools in Kansas.
He talks about how property taxes played in it. I think you could change those.
So right now in Kansas, property taxes account for 31% of tax revenue, but Kansas, compared to other states, has extremely low property tax. So what we hope to do is, because education has been cut in the past, to make up for the deficit, we want to increase our property tax to the point where we can put that money into education, so we can start funding education, so we can get better teachers, and we can be able to fund these schools that aren't as great as other schools, so they can be on a more equal level playing field.
And as Attorney General, I'm of a strong belief that we need to start in the classroom, because if we can better educate our students, it means less people having trouble with the law, and that saves the state even more money.
Yep, I wish to also promote the funding through the Treasury Department by increasing the luxury tax and gas tax. The luxury tax mainly goes towards the upper class who already have enough money, so that this would be a progressive tax that would help all students in Kansas from lower class to upper class alike.
And as Commissioner of Insurance, I would like to make sure that the facilities at schools are protected and can be paid for, but also that such individuals as student athletes who are injured and receive a disability receive that protection that they need and that they are cared for.
Thank you. And you all mentioned increasing income tax and luxury tax. On that note, how do you plan to fix the deficit, the millions of dollars of deficit that we have in the state?
So for the sake of clarification, we don't intend to increase income tax. Primarily want to increase the property tax, and then sin taxes, luxury tax falls in that category. And we hope by increasing taxes, right now in Kansas taxes are extremely low because of the several years of tax cuts. So that's the reason why Kansas has such a large deficit. So if we can bring those taxes back to a normal level, and these taxes are taxes that can be raised because they're not as infringing on certain people. So that will help repay the deficit and get Kansas back into a strong economy.
We're also taking action to make sure that those people who are usually disproportionately affected by a poor economic system no longer feel those effects, at least not nearly as much. This occurs in two main ways through our party, the first of which is going to be through improving labor union laws, thus giving them more power to be able to actually be activists. Unions for a long, long time in the United States were able to be activists for their parties, were able to develop new platforms, were able to advocate for them, and actually have power in government, and that's no longer true because of the restrictions that have been placed upon them. We think that in Kansas, losing some of those and putting in place new plans and policies that allow for unions to create more power, allows for labor laws to have better action within Kansas, or at least the state, and then also means that they can also fight for better wages, which is the second part of our economic plan, which is raising the minimum wage to $15. Now, although this might sound illogical to quite a few people, it in fact has been beneficial in various cities that have already tried it, like San Francisco, like Seattle very specifically, did it over a year ago, and we've seen that their economic output has only increased. We don't see huge layoffs. None of the adverse effects actually occur. A lot of the benefits to them, where people's standard of living increases, where people are reinvesting more money into the economy, and where overall people are doing better. Doing this in Kansas means that we have more money to spend, it means more tax money comes in, and it means that we move out of a deficit that we've been under for so long.
We also plan to fix the loopholes within the companies. Sometimes there are subsidies given to large or small businesses that often aren't used to actually growing the Kansas economy. Many of these companies just profit these subsidies, and thus we provide no benefit while we're still spending. So we plan to cut back on some of the subsidies that are non-essential.
With these same companies, we'd also like to make sure that they're not committing insurance fraud or anything along that line. So I'll be working to make sure they're not taking advantage of the system.
So in conclusion, what we're doing is, in the past, we've tried to get the Kansas legislature has tried to give tax cuts to these companies in hopes that the trickle-down economics would help the everyday worker, but that simply hasn't happened. They've just pocketed the money. We want to change that. We want to start from the workers and the individual side.
We also raised the minimum wage in Kansas to create a higher cost or a higher standard of living for people who don't have a high standard of living. At the same time, also increasing the economy through increased tax dollars and just increased consumer spending overall.
Thank you. And on that note, should the rich be taxed higher than the average Kansan?
I firmly believe in a graduated income tax because the burden of tax of certain people is for the most part unsustainable. Someone making just above that line where they are taxed, most of the time they cannot afford to be taxed at a flat rate. So with the graduated income tax, it allows people who don't have as much money to pay less money so they can make more money. And then people who are making over what is called a required amount of income are going to pay more tax because it is believed that they can bear the burden of tax better.
What's important to understand about a graduated tax bracket is that although many people believe it's unfair because it cuts off at a certain point, like say you're making $200,000 and that's where the cutoff is. Below $200,000 is a 40% and above $200,000 is 42%. That's not necessarily how it works. Like if you were making $201,000, 42% would only be the tax on that extra $1,000. The way the graduated tax bracket works is the first $60,000 is only 20%, whereas the next $60,000 is 22%, and it gradually goes up from there. That's the way the tax bracket works and allows for an equitable distribution of funds coming from people that are at the higher end of this tax bracket and also the lower end, where those people at the bottom are not disproportionately affected, and also the people at the top still have money to spend, but also have that money to save.
Thank you. And a few more questions. How do you respond to free health care in Kansas?
We'll advocate for especially the lower section, as in the most impoverished people in Kansas are going to have free or at least very, very low cost healthcare. That's probably the best policy. Usually those are the people that are most likely to be injured or to experience chronic illnesses. These are the people that need to be treated first, or else it is even more of a drain on the economy and the healthcare system in general. Furthermore, we think that there are some reductions that can be made, but not necessarily, especially for the lower class states who have the majority of the benefit.
Everyone should be entitled to the same level of care. Just because you're poor doesn't mean that you can't afford to have certain surgery. With this, we'd also like to note that pre-existing conditions should be covered under insurance plans and should be accepted. Telling a family to go away because their daughter has cancer is totally inhumane and not deserving.
And we don't really like the term free healthcare. Perhaps a better term would be affordable healthcare, in which we have a system in which there are no handouts, but everyone's paying a reasonable amount with the circumstances included.
Yep. So the funding for this would come from, first, the upper class will be paying more taxes as we planned earlier, and thus we'll have more funding that we can help to pay for the health insurance costs for the lower classes, so that they don't have to pay nearly as much as they do right now.
Thank you. Last question for this conference. How would you fund your money through energy, such as oil energy and nuclear power energy?
Okay, well, I'm glad you asked that question, because what we want to do is, in southern Kansas, fracking is a very popular practice, and fracking, studies have shown in the past couple of years that fracking has dramatically increased the amount of earthquakes in northern Oklahoma and southern Kansas, to the point where people are actually being in danger because the earth is constantly shaking around them. And not only that, fracking leaves these, huge holes in the ground that are just a blight on the landscape, of the beautiful Kansas landscape. So what we want to do is we want to increase taxes on the fracking industry, as well as decrease subsidies that are existing on the fracking industry, and instead divert those to increasing subsidies to alternative energy sources, namely nuclear energy, and then also harvesting all of that land that's not the best for farming, but we really don't have anything developed on it, for harvesting wind energy through turbines, and then nuclear energy, as I said.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think the subsidies for nuclear energy, which haven't been developed in portions of Kansas where they could be, there's been an advancement in technology, especially within the last decade when it comes to nuclear energy, that makes it, one, much safer, and two, much more efficient. Previously, very small portions of the uranium were actually used to create the energy. Now that's been increased greatly. We also see that they're much safer than they have been in the past, and the majority of the radioactive waste that's always produced can now be disposed of in a safe manner that simply wasn't available before. It's something that Kansas can move into simply because of the land that we have and the ability for us to develop these plants, and that we haven't done yet.
And Kansas's potential for nuclear energy has already been displayed by the Wolf Creek reactor. And again, it leaves no emissions, and the byproducts that are stored within a mountain in Colorado. So we have no fear of that.
There's also a big possibility for Kansas to develop new wind energy. If you go down to, where is it?
If you go down to the Great Bend, you see turbines going through there every week or so. I mean, they're being built already, and turbines account for 19% of Kansas's energy, because there's so much potential to harvest wind energy. So we think there's still a lot of untapped areas we could go into to develop, because wind energy is fairly cheap and it's sustainable, and there's no pollution.
So it's a longer term investment too, where the upfront capital investment is larger than what most people would like to fund, and that's why Kansas as a state needs to provide subsidies to where they can actually create these new turbines and make sure that a long-term investment is made now and not later on down the road where it's not nearly as beneficial.
In fact, it's been estimated that Kansas doesn't even it utilizes less than 1% of its wind power capacity. Additionally, in the past decade, wind in Kansas has grown by over 1,500%, and we need to continue to foster this unique opportunity for wind in our state.
So thus, the Nationalist Party strongly supports alternative energy and research, development, and funding, of course.
So you would say you would not promote the continued use of coal in Kansas?
We'd say that there needs to be a gradual decline of both coal and oil use within our state, and then also hopefully within our country.
Most importantly, we are going to be decreasing taxes towards fracking. We're leaving oil,
Decreasing subsidies.
Decreasing subsidies, increasing taxes towards fracking. But oil and gas industries in Kansas will stand as is.
The most important thing about coal, though, is that we're going to phase it out very slowly. Right now, it's a very key component of our energy grid, so we want to keep it running in places like Northeast Kansas, where we currently are.
Thank you, gentlemen. That'll be all.
Thank you.
Thank you.